What's up, guys? We're here at the cabin today. We're going to talk to y'all about the top 5 reasons why hunters get busted. And the very first one is poor setups. We've been in many of those.
Oh yeah.
And you all have probably seen Zinger look like the guy, what is it, the Cowardly Lion from Wizard of Oz? When he's got the ghillie suit on.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
And the face paint. And it looks ridiculous. I've dressed up like that a few times too, but it actually works really well for breaking up your outline. And your outline is what deer seem to pick up on more. We're not as focused on camo as much anymore. It doesn't really seem to matter what we wear out there. We could be out there in blue jeans and a flannel shirt, or the best camo pattern that they make. They pick up on your outline. Mm-hmm. So that's what we're always trying to be conscious of. And that's why we're wearing these, you know, elaborate ghillie suit setups, or even I've seen you go out to the woods without a ghillie suit, but you'll put like this thing around your hat.
Yep.
That just adds more camouflage up here around your shoulders so that your head doesn't stick out, because that's what they're picking up on is your outline. And it's especially important if you're hunting on the ground.
Yep. But even in a tree too, I mean, there's just so many situations where you can make your outline noticeable from where the deer are, and you may not realize it if you're not thinking about it, you know, a lot before you get into some setup, whether that's up in a tree or on the ground. I think it's important to think about what your background is first.
Basically, what's the view from the deer?
Yep.
A lot of times we do that with turkeys, where we shoot a turkey and we go out there to like where the bird was standing and look back at our setup to see what the turkey saw. We'll do that occasionally when it comes to deer hunting too. Mm-hmm. Like when we're looking at a setup, if we're out scouting this time of year and we're like, ooh, that'd be a good spot to set up on this trail crossing, we want to go out to the trail crossing and kind of look back into the setup. And we've talked about this in the past, when especially important when you're hunting on the ground, if you've got horizontal like background cover and foreground cover.
Yep. Horizontal and vertical cover. Like if you have anything that I guess has stuff going different directions and breaks up an otherwise like monotonous cover type.
Yeah, when we were hunting in Arkansas years ago, me and Greg, they had piles of like shrub-like cover in little short trees with small stems, small trunks. But the problem down there was it was prone to flooding. Yep. So all of your basically chest high to ground cover was just nuked through there. Yep. And it was just flat. And that's all you had was just a bunch of vertical, small stem trees going up everywhere. And there was no horizontal ground cover. There's no brush piles, no logs, no nothing, because it all got washed out.
And so your outline sticks out.
Oh yeah, we started getting busted a bunch hunting on the ground, because it's like all they had to do was lower their head and look down through there, and your outline just popped out, because all they're looking at is 1,000 of those little tree trunks.
Yep.
But if we find a brush pile or something, that is money. Or like you said, just a down tree that intersects with a standing tree. If you got a giant oak tree with a big trunk on it, where, you know, or multiple trunks together, kind of like you've got this triple hickory here. Mm-hmm. You got multiple trunks together like that may offer a little better spot to set up. But we're, like you mentioned earlier, we're also thinking about this from tree hunting as well, whether we're in a stand or a saddle. If you just go up a straight pole 20 feet in the air that's this big around, you're gonna stick out like a sore thumb, especially if there's 2 dudes up there hanging off of it. And we've noticed this is especially true when you're hunting with a saddle, because you're leaning away from the tree. If you're in a saddle though, and you've got a tree that goes up and then splits a bunch of different directions, you just look like one of the trunks up there. Mm-hmm. If you're leaning out with a saddle, versus if you're in one of those telephone pole like situations.
Yep. I think it's also important in a tree and on the ground to look at the skyline and be conscious of that. Like if you're looking through the woods that direction, there's a whole bunch of back cover for about the height you would be set up in a tree. It would be really hard to get busted if that's your back cover there at 10 to 25 foot. On the other hand, if you look towards the sky over there, if you're leaning up against a tree where there's nothing but sky behind you, you're going to be sticking out, and your movement's just going to be
way more pronounced and way easier for them to pick up.
Yep. And the same thing goes for the ground too. Like I've definitely made the mistake of trying to be set up on a ridge or try to peek over a ridge, and I'm getting skylined, and it took some time to realize that you can't just have good cover right in front of you or behind you. Sometimes you have to have good cover you know, all around and even back behind you a good ways to break up your outline on the skyline.
And another thing that I'll mention before we wrap this portion up is not every setup's going to be perfect. You're going to have to make things work in a lot of situations just to be close enough to where the deer are to get a good shot, especially with a bow. But sometimes if you're in a less than desirable setup, like one of those telephone pole trees, but you have a lot of cover in between you and the deer, you can get away with more. That's why, you know, it's important to reiterate, think about what the deer can see on the way into the setup, especially when you're scouting it, you know, in the summer or the year prior. Walk up there, and if there's some branches or bushes or something in between the trail and your tree where you can anticipate that deer walking past on the way in, where you can get drawn, that way once they break out in the open at 15 yards and you're sky lit, they may bust you, but they're toast at that point. They're in the middle of the trail and broadside and you're shooting them. Where you really got to worry with what Zinger's talking about is if you're skylit over there and there's nothing in between you and the trails and the deer's coming from 60 yards or so or 80 yards into your tree all the way up to bow range, that's a long way for that deer to travel with you in the wide open.
And not get caught while you're moving. Or, you know, if he's looking right at you, it's going to be way harder to move. And I kind of think, know your weak spots in a setup. No matter if you're in a tree or on the ground, know where you have to be cautious, know where you have to check before you start moving around. Like if you've got a weak spot where you know the deer is going to be able to see into your setup, or you know, if there's a certain direction a deer can come from where it's more likely to skyline you in a tree, whatever it may be, know where that spot is and move slow and check it before you make any big movements within that setup. I think that's
really a great
helps.
point. I'm thinking about that as you're talking. Like if you look at these hickories right here and you're set up in front of them, you've got good back cover for anything that's out here in front of us this direction. But your weak spot is over here at the side where you have no side cover. So if there's a deer coming from over here, you're silhouetted on the front of that tree with no back cover at all.
And I'd say almost every setup has a weak spot. So I think it's important to kind of think of that and visualize how you could get busted in those weak spots, and that'll help prevent you from getting busted there.
Yeah, because we have been busted a lot.
Oh yeah.
All right, on this segment, me and Nick are going to talk about how to avoid getting busted with your ground scent. So one of the main things we focus on whenever we're talking about ground scent and getting into a setup is our access. Say if we're going to hunt back in the timber here, 40, 50 yards back in there, and there's a creek that runs around the outside that we can take, we'll get in that creek with the boat or walk through the creek through the water. That is always a good way to avoid your ground scent from getting on all the vegetation as you're walking into your tree stand setup or wherever you're going to hunt. A lot of times the main thing that people talk about is keeping your wind where you want it, and that's obviously the main focus. But the other thing you got to keep in mind is where you're leaving all your scent as you're getting into your setups.
So what Ted's saying is if you can find an access point that has water, like a creek or something that you can do to go around thick vegetation to keep from leaving your scent, that's the route you should take.
Yeah, we're always looking for a way that we can get in through the water. Not always the case, but if we can, that's usually the route we'll take.
If you do have to go through taller vegetation, maybe not something like this where it's definitely going to rub up on you, but something that's more like knee height, something you could do is get some rubber knee boots or hip boots, and that's something that leaves a lot less scent as you're walking through that vegetation. And so the issue is when deer encounter that ground scent as they're approaching your setup, that could prevent them from getting all the way to you and keep you from getting a shot and bust them out of there 100 yards before they even get to you. Or it could be right as you're at full draw and they're standing over your footprints and then it's busted up after that. So once you do get to your setup, say you're going to be in a saddle up in a tree, you know, your ground scent you're leaving down at the bottom of the tree is probably just as important as the ground scent you were leaving on your way in. Say you got packs or whatever, I think it's best to try to get your packs up in the tree with you. That way your scent is traveling out over where the deer are going to be approaching from versus just traveling along the ground. I know Warb and I last year ran into that when he killed that big buck on Halloween.
Yeah.
The first buck that came in got our ground scent because we had packs at the bottom of the tree, and that scent's just blowing right to where that deer was coming from.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I feel like we do a lot of the time is whenever we're getting into our tree stand or wherever we're going to set up, pay attention to where you're walking And if the deer are coming from this way, say, just make sure you have an opening to shoot them before they get to that spot. I feel like there's a lot of times where we're set up and our trail that we walked in on is right on the edge, so you got to make sure that you get a shot before they get all the way to your ground scent. One thing about the ground scent too is, like, if you're in a bare spot like this, you're not necessarily leaving as much ground scent in that type of vegetation as compared to this. So like I was saying, when you have a spot that's bare, like kind of like this right here, like a logging road or whatever, me and Warb had a hunt similar to that a couple years ago in Missouri. We walked all the way to our tree on a logging road and got our tree stand set up, and the doe that he ended up shooting walked pretty much right through our ground scent because it was that bare dirt, not a whole lot of vegetation there, and she never picked up on it. A lot of times people talk about going in and scouting a spot right before a big rain or something like that, and we've heard that that can help, but a lot of times we hear, like from dog trackers and people like that, that actually helps animals smell the ground scent better. So you want to be a little bit careful if you're thinking you're going to go in and scout a spot and then hoping that the rain's going to wash it away. And a lot of times that moisture actually will amplify the scent for those deer that are coming through there, make it easier for them to pick up on it.
And one other thing is, our friend Ted Miller, he likes to go, say you're going to check your trail cameras and you're worried about your ground scent you're going to leave in there. Well, what Ted likes to do is go in about now. It's like 8:30 or 9 o'clock right now, so that mid-morning type range. He likes to go in, check his cameras in. That way there's more time for that scent to dissipate. Say he's going to hunt there in the evening or the following morning maybe. Yep. There's more time for that scent to dissipate and kind of get out of there where he's less likely to get picked up on. All right, so essentially what you have to do here is hover in via drone, drop into your saddle set, and then exfil the same way when the hunt's over with. And then if you kill one, you tie a little tether to your boot, pull him up, and out you go with your drone. So hope that tip helps you. Go get you a drone, I guess.
Yeah, it's either that or just don't go. So.
All right, all jokes aside, we're just kidding, but keep in mind your scent stinks. So be mindful of where you're leaving it.
All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is wind and getting smelled by the deer that are coming in, because that tends to happen to us a lot. But before we do, I want to address the elephant in the room right now, because a lot of y'all are typing in your comments down below like, why don't you guys use scent control and do all this stuff? Really, we don't use much scent control other than playing the wind. However, if you are going to take any precautions, at least the way that we hunt is we pay attention to that ground scent, like what Nick and Ted were just talking about. Like Nick used an example of hip waders, wearing those into a potential spot, or walking through the water, or walking on bare dirt. That's our scent control. That's the way we think about scent control anyways. We don't use any products, but if we were, I will occasionally spray my boots or my pants or something to try to eliminate some of that scent that's going to be left on plants and on the ground as we're going in and out. Other than that, we don't use any scent control for playing the wind, because we've been busted using everything under the sun.
And a lot of times we're just living out of our vehicle or in a tent or whatever, so there's not really, you know, a good way to go about the standard steps that it takes to participate in scent controlling.
Yeah. and there's always two of us out there, so there's double the amount of human scent in the woods that there would be if you were out there by yourself. And I've noticed, like, even when I'm self-filming sometimes, I don't get smelled as often when deer get downwind of me, and that's what I think is going on. There's half the amount of scent in there that what there usually is for us,
and double the responsibility of actually like going through with it. Like, it takes so much more to get people to sign up for full-on scent control, so we just had to stop doing it.
Yeah, we don't mess with it. We play the wind, and that is like the number one way that we get busted. You know, is when deer get downwind of us, especially with two guys, they're smelling us and they're getting out of there. If a big buck comes in and he hears you, he sees you, maybe he smells your ground scent, they may not respond favorably to that. But if a big buck comes in and they smell us, that's kind of the nail in the coffin. We're toast at that point. So we're constantly worried about wind and where it's blowing and thermals and how that's operating. I mean, not just with deer, but also with elk.
There's been many situations where we are on a trip, not showering, not washing our clothes. We're days into it, starting to get real ripe. And as long as the wind's favorable for us, we've had animals get really close to us. So you can definitely get away with smelling very bad out there. We've got very much, evident or, proof of that through a video, but you have to be conscious of what the wind's doing, and that can change throughout the day. It can be very variable from spot to spot, especially if you're moving around, so you have to be paying attention to what the wind's doing.
Thermals are really important too in the early morning and in the evening, especially in the mountains when you're hunting elk, but also in these hills when we're hunting deer.
Yep.
It's like in the evenings when you're walking along the base of these hills where those drainages run down into a bottom, you can feel that air coming down there. Even if there's no wind current whatsoever, you can feel those thermals pulling down into those drains.
Yep.
And in the mountains, it's incredibly pronounced.
Yep.
So you can, and when you're elk hunting, it's like you live and die by those all the time. But it's definitely something you need to pay attention to when you're hunting deer. I've found myself in those situations where you're hunting in the evening and you're set up on the ground in the bottom of a hole and nothing gets you.
Yep.
Whereas if you were in a tree stand up on that ridge and all of a sudden a buck walks down below you, even though your day winds may have been forecasted to blow completely away from that deer, all of a sudden that deer picks up his nose and he takes off, and you're like, oh man, that's his sixth sense, He boogered, he's just one of them big old deer. He got in there and he got to feeling weird and he got out. It's like, no, your thermals are pulling down that ditch, and he caught you at the bottom of it at the wrong time. And that's just food for thought. If you're in one of those situations, especially, big deer a lot of times will move in that last 30, all deer will move in that last 30 minutes, 45 minutes of the day, and that sun is down. All that warm air, or cold air is starting to come down that ditch.
I think it's really important to plan ahead for that wind shift too. Obviously your predominant wind is going to be important, but if you're going to try to set up above where you think deer are going to be coming from in the evening, your wind might be good for a couple of hours in a setup, but all of a sudden it's going to switch.
Yeah, that's the advantage of being mobile. If you're on the ground or something and you're set up on the saddle and you've got all these predominant winds for 3 hours in the afternoon, then all of a sudden thermal switch, boom, make a quick J loop or something and get in position so that your wind is favorable again. We've done that several times.
Yeah, and I think that really planning your whole day based off of those switches is important, because if you don't, you're just going to keep finding yourself in that same loop of man, I thought this was going to be the right spot, and then something changed in the wind, and now I'm getting busted by deer. So I think just trying to be conscious of that at all times and try to learn as much as you possibly can about how the wind changes from spot to spot, whether you're in the sun, you're on top of the ridge, on the bottom, whatever it may be, there's going to be this constant change, and you can never really stop learning about it, I don't think.
That's why we use milkweed. Dan talked about that years ago, how milkweed will show you downrange of your setup what the wind is doing, what the thermals are doing. The puff bottles will show you a little bit of that, but the milkweed will show you more what it's doing as it moves away from your spot. And that's another thing, is we've been busted a lot by swirling winds. We got lots of footage of bucks coming in, especially big ones, getting me in particular. I've had this happen numerous times where, the wind felt a certain direction in your setup. And if you would have just used a puff bottle, it was blowing away from the deer. But they came into 40 or 50 yards and smelled us and got out of there. And we're like, what the heck just happened? But when you drop that milkweed, it tells you the full story. Yes, at your stand height or whatever, your scent is blowing in these woods and the deer's coming over here. But if you drop that milkweed, it's sucking back every couple minutes. So you drop milkweed, me and Ted, that one buck, and the buck nest smelled us, I was at full draw, ready to wax him. And he just smelled us the last second. Oh, I have nightmares still. Anyway, we dropped the milkweed and it would go way back in those woods. And a couple minutes later, Ted was like, look here. And here it comes. Right back out into the field. And that's exactly what he hit. So you got to keep in mind that wind flows like water through the environment, and it's swirling around big trees, it's swirling through openings. The higher the wind is in some of those situations, the more that it's going to swirl. If we're hunting in hills and we're in the bottom of a bowl in the middle of the day, you have all that wind coming over the top, and it is just kicking around in circles every direction. Even though at that exact moment it may feel like it's moving away from you, it's likely swirling up and around you, and every deer within that bowl will smell you. And in that same scenario, if you would have waited to hunt that bowl until last light with no wind, where the thermals are coming down, nothing in there might smell you. It's like literally a matter of hours, everything in that whole area might smell you versus nothing.
Yeah, even minutes sometimes. I think this could be a whole video in itself. There's so many different little variables, and I think it's just important to obviously keep it in mind when you're planning setups, but also just continue to try to learn about, you know, when you make a mistake, try to learn from it rather than just chalk it up to, well, it happens, yeah, it does, but we can always get a little bit better at trying to read the wind, and I think that if you're doing that, then you're eventually gonna feel more confident in what you're doing.
All right, another way that hunters get busted is by moving. Now, a deer's eyes are, they're a prey animal, so they're, you know, they got the eyes on their sides of their heads, they can see well in the dark. Their depth perception isn't great, but they're really good at picking up movement. And a lot of times it just comes with experience, learning what you can get away with as far as moving. Now, big picture, we start with walking into your setup. You know, walking into the setup is part of the hunt, so, you know, we try to stalk our stand or stalk our setup as much as possible. Move slowly, pay attention to what's going on, glassing ahead. That way, you know, you're more likely to see deer before they see you. If you're just walking in real fast, not paying attention, thinking I'm just gonna get to my setup, everything's good, then I can start being careful with my movement. A lot of times you're gonna get busted, and you may not even know it. You bust deer so far ahead because they see you moving that you may ruin a hunt and you don't even know about it. So an example of this, had a hunt a couple years ago, and I was just walking into my setup real carefully, just kind of sneaking in, glassing as I went. I saw a doe bedded about 20 yards from my stand. Obviously, I wanted to get up in my tree, and I didn't want to just completely blow her back into the bedding area. So I, you know, threw some rocks down the ridge, and I was able to move her off just by throwing rocks. She didn't spook. I had a great hunt, saw a couple mature bucks, but I think that a large part of that was because I was being careful with my movement as I was accessing my stand.
So once you're at your setup, you're gonna try to move as little as possible. I'm not really that good at that, so knowing that's a weakness of mine, I definitely put a lot of emphasis on the setup, which Warb and I talked about earlier. But once I'm in there, knowing where I can move and where I can't move, kind of planning ahead to where the deer are going to be when I make those moves is really important. On top of it, just in general, I would say as much as possible, trying to move as slowly as possible too is really important. Like, let's say the conditions are like what we've got today, where it's really calm. There's not a lot moving around. If I start kind of doing this in my setup, it's gonna be really easy to pick up on that movement if a deer's approaching. But if I'm moving super slow, like if I go to glass and I'm making moves like this, you know, very, very controlled, very slow, that's gonna reduce the odds of getting busted, especially from a distance. The other thing I think that's important is, like I said, knowing the weaknesses, but also knowing the spots that you can move pretty freely. For example, when I set up on the ground, I like to have a lot of front cover. That allows me to be way down here low and doing all kinds of stuff. I mean, I'll be down under the, you know, cover level, doing whatever I want. I mean, there's a situation even when Jake and I stalked the buck in North Dakota.
Was I supposed to get down with you?
You can, if you want. We could be down here doing whatever we want. But that buck that Jake and I stalked when you and Gooch were up on the ridge, the deer's looking at us in that footage. I mean, you can see that he's looking right at us. And Jake is sitting up filming, so as a viewer, you're seeing that deer locked on us. But I was down below, the grass drawn, moving all around. You can't really see that in that footage, but I'm doing all kinds of stuff down there because I know the deer can't see me. I'm watching his antlers and blocking his eyes with the cover, and everything that I'm doing is below that. So I know that he can't see me. And I think that, you know, whether you're on the ground, in a tree, knowing the places that you can move and where you have cover blocking you from the deer's vision is just really, really important. Probably the number one thing, aside from moving slow.
I like what you said, and I think it comes back to mental preparedness. Like when you get into setup, going through all your different shot options, that way you know how much movement it's going to take to shoot here, here, and here. That helps. And a lot of this is just going to come through experience of knowing when you can move, how much you can move, moving decisively at the right time. Sometimes I'm shocked at how much movement you can get away with a deer, with multiple deer within bow range. And a lot of that just comes from experience, but obviously you want to be on the, the safer side, and you got a deer coming at you that you can see their eyes, there's a potential they can see you. All right, let's say now we've got a deer within bow range. What's your thought process for moving, for getting a shot?
I think the biggest thing is, like you just said, if you can see a deer's eyes, you're kind of in danger of being spotted. So as kind of a rule of thumb, I like to have ahead of time a spot or 2 or 10 planned where the deer is going to get his eyes behind something that's between us. So for example, looking down at all the shooting lanes that, you know, we have in a setup, we're going to be picking spots that deer's vision is going to be blocked. So for example, we hear a deer coming from a distance, can tell which direction it's coming from, we're going to orient ourselves in that direction. Then we've already got spots picked out that are going to block its vision from us. And once the deer reaches those spots, just draw and then let them come into that shooting lane. It's really important though to plan how to execute that drawing movement, because depending on what the setup looks like, you might have to do different things, orient yourself in different ways, be conscious of what's above and below you. That way you don't bounce your limbs off something. So I think practice drawing beforehand is going to be really helpful in just kind of visualizing how the deer are going to walk through there. One example that always comes to mind was the buck that Jake and I shot. I remember thinking in that setup, man, like this is going to be awesome. If a deer goes behind that one patch of grass that he went behind, he's going to be completely covered. And sure enough, he comes out. I will admit, he kind of busted me because I was getting a little too excited early, and I could tell that he was looking at me, but there was enough tall stuff between us and him that I froze and just kind of let him calm back down. And then once he started moving, I was able to grab my bow, get myself ready. And when he went behind that stuff, I was not only able to draw, but I was able to draw and stand all the way up. He stopped slightly quartering away, and it was the perfect opportunity.
Yep. And there's going to be times where the deer is not going to go behind something, or is going to be in the wide open. You got to come to full draw, and you just have to be able to pull slowly straight back. And if you're overbowed, if you're pulling too much poundage and you have to do the old raise up to shoot, that's probably a little too much weight for deer hunting.
Yeah.
If you can't just pull slowly straight back, because there's going to be situations where you just don't have any cover to work with.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like in those situations, if their eyes are facing you or you're able to see their eye at all, those are the situations in which you're going to want to draw slowly. Like Greg said, sometimes that just takes some trial and error, and there's a lot more error than there is success on those things when you first start, but just keep learning about it, I suppose.
All right, we're standing over here next to the yaks, and we're going to talk about how to get in and out of your areas without spooking deer, because we have certainly spooked a lot of them doing that. That's a huge part of it. If you booger the deer on your way into the spot where you're planning to hunt, you're pretty much toast. I mean, and that has definitely happened a lot. We were just talking about like the hill country stuff y'all hunt out east.
Yeah.
You know, when you guys are walking ridge tops, if you don't understand where the deer bed and where they're at that particular time of the day, you could spook deer from 500-600 yards away.
Oh yeah, especially, you know, once the leaves start falling and you don't have all this cover around you, they can see for so far.
Yeah.
And that movement on the spine of that ridge is just going to give you away immediately.
Yeah, you're silhouetted up there, you're making a bunch of noise if it's calm outside. I mean, there's all these factors come into play when you're trying to access your area, but this is really evident when we're hunting bedding areas, and you guys are watching us hunt bedding areas a lot. That's why when we go in and scout, we want to figure out exactly where the deer are bedding in the edge of that cover transition, and actually get in the beds and look and see what they can see, because that's what we're worried about, is how do we get as close to that spot as possible without them seeing us. And if you don't understand what they're set up to see from their bedding area or hear or smell, you could be spooking a lot of them before you even get in there. And scouting is really, really important for this particular tip, because if you don't know the little intricacies of the landscape and what you can get away with when it comes to entering these spots, then you're going to spook way more deer going in and out of them. So even if it's a couple weeks before you plan to hunt, say you're planning to hunt late October, early November, you can scout aggressively through the middle part of October, early October, late September, and give yourself a couple weeks time. I would rather have that information and have my access routes dialed in, like on my OnX maps and everything, so that I know how to get in and out of there safely with boogering as few deer as possible. If I don't have that information, then I'm just kind of going in there blind. I don't know exactly where they're bedded. I don't know exactly where they're feeding. You're picking up all this little stuff when you're out there scouting. It becomes incredibly important when you're going in for a morning hunt in the dark. I love hunting the mornings when I can, but I really want to have my access dialed in for those spots.
Yeah.
So I want to go in there beforehand, and I want to have like the exact trail marked so that I know exactly how to get into that. I want to have the tree picked out, I want to have the setup picked out for that particular wind so that I can get in and out of there in the morning. It's way harder to do at 3 a.m. in the dark if you're going in blind somewhere and you don't know where a big boulder is or how deep a ditch is that you're crossing. All that is just good information to have that will make you more successful by spooking less deer when you go in and out.
Another good way to get in and out is kayaks. Using water access whenever you can is very helpful. Cuts down on your ground scent and can also cut down on your travel time to and from greatly depending on how far you got to go.
Oh yeah.
Zach and I used them last year and it was super nice to be able to just cruise up and down a creek in a kayak, see a river crossing or something, pop out, glass it, see like what it looks like up there, get back in the kayak and go back down and keep looking for more setups. Quick way to scout, quick way to get in and out hunting.
Yeah, and you're spooking less deer in and out every single time. So you're getting more hunts out of your trip by using that. I mean, no ground scent. We've also, Zinger and Ted that time, they paddled right up to numerous bucks chasing a doe. And they're within bow range of them in the canoe. And those deer don't care about them at all when they're floating in that silent, canoe or kayak in the water. It's just something about it. We've paddled by so many deer in the daylight and in the dark in a creek like that. They just don't expect you to be there. If you're walking through the woods, however, though, they're blowing out of there way before you even get to them. Yep. So it's a very, very good way to put low pressure on them and get in and out.
All right, and that's it. Those are the 5 ways we get busted all the time.
Yeah, and we still do. It happens a lot. We're giving you guys tips on how to avoid this, but we will continue to make these same mistakes probably in the future. Just learn from it and keep on moving. Try to bust fewer deer and you'll probably shoot more of them.
And egress.